Okay, so if we're here, we can continue. Sorry for breaking transmission. So like I was saying, you typically would take your variables, turn them into expressions, and put them in methods. So now I'm doing this on a browser, and some things are being automated for me, right? But it's possible that you are doing this in an environment that will not do certain things automatically for you. So there are a few gotchas you need to know about a method, right? Good. So, or a function, right? So now, like I said, a function typically, like we said, okay, yeah, let me go like this. Now, when we say a variable, I equal to 5, we said that this is the identifier, this is the assignment operator, and this is the value, right? Now, for a function, this is our function, and our function is identified by the string following this keyword def, right? So this def keyword is like saying to the interpreter, I want to create a function. Whatever follows is the name of the function. Now, after the function name, you typically would have a pair of opening and closing brackets. Yep, shoot.
Before this def function, the variables that you assigned.
I can't hear you.
I said before the def function that we just started doing.
Yep.
You know we were doing we're using identifiers before that.
Yep.
Are these necessary with the def function? Yeah, just there because we did them before this.
No, so yeah,
And it's not working.
no, okay. I understand your question. You are asking if I can use a variable I declared outside of a function in a function, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, you very much can do that. So for instance, let's say I want to encapsulate the functionality of adding I to J in a function. So let's say I'll call this function add variables, right? Now this function, because these variables already exist, you want to say something?
That's not what I'm asking.
Okay.
What I'm asking is that all these declarations that we made initially, are they
Okay.
necessary for the method function?
Not really, no. They are not necessary. It all depends on your style. It doesn't mean that you must write it like this or the way I said it. No, it all depends on what you achieve. So let me do some bit of background, right? Now, assuming that I had a function that will add I to J, right? All it does is return I plus J. Now, there is a huge problem with this. The problem is that I can only add I to J. Does that make sense?
Peter, I think I understand this question. So if you mind, I can quickly explain to you. So
Okay.
what he's saying is that maybe he was not a part of the beginning of this course. You know, you were explaining the creation of variables by all these examples you have above. And so, and then all of a sudden you started defining functions in this Python code we are writing. So he wants to know that all these variables that you defined up here, are they really necessary? Are they relevant to these functions that you have defined? That's it. So I think the answer is
Okay.
just that you use them for examples. So it's not really needed.
Okay.
Is
Okay.
that
Now I
it,
get it.
Promise?
I didn't put them in my, yeah,
Okay.
Your volume
So
is really
basically,
low.
them in my
you're
example.
extremely low. I can barely hear you.
I didn't put them in my code and it's not running.
Okay.
Okay. So like I was saying, let's get rid of this. So as I was saying, your function would typically begin with the def keyword, the identifier, the parameters it would operate on, and the column keyword. Now, in some environments, and when I say environments, I'm talking about IDs and stuff. Some people write program in Notepad where there is no help whatsoever. Now, there's a fundamental thing you need to know. Now, this top level statement is the function declaration, right? Every other thing that follows is the body of this function. Now, what does that mean? So now my function can typically, most functions don't begin and end with one statement or one expression, right? They typically would involve multiple lines, right? So how does Python, I know in Java, I don't know if most of you were part of the Java class. In Java, I can type, I can say int s equal to 0, and I can keep doing this over and over again, right? The important thing is that Java knows that this function begins and ends with everything in these curly braces, right? Now, but in Python, there are no curly braces. So how does Python know what is the beginning, how it knows the statements that belong to a function? How is it able to differentiate, and so on and so forth? Python is able to do that using indentation. So basically, a method or the body of a function would typically be 1, 2, 3, it's supposed to be 4, right? Okay, so typically, the body of a function would be 4 spaces. So I would say, I don't know, this website is a bit weird. It's just 2 here. Maybe I have to tweak the settings. But anyway, point is, there has to be some space between the first line that defines the function and the body of the function. So for everything that begins with leading spaces, with these spaces, Python will say, okay, I hear you. Everything at this level of indentation I would run it when I am running this function. So in other words, let us say we want to create a function that says that would say good morning or good evening, people. Good evening, Peter. The time is whatever, right? So this function would say, I would name it say hello, and it will take a name, right? Now, like I said, you typically end the declaration of the function by colon, and then you'd say, okay, so we want to say hello, right? So let's say hello string. Okay, we typically want to say print. Now I want to print 2 lines, right? So I would say right, it is evening. Now, what does this mean? This is simply a method that would say hello to whatever is passed to it and print it is evening. Now, this is a function that takes more than one expression, or that encapsulates more than one expression, which says the first line would say hello to whatever was called, and the second line would say it is evening. Yeah. So let's use this function. Let's say, comment everything out. And let's say hello. And I typically would pass in Peter, right? And I would run it. Oh, sorry. I didn't need to print it. Sorry. So now, like I said, the fundamental reason why I give this example is to show you that a function does not begin and end with just one expression. You can have multiple lines. I can keep saying print, it will soon be time to sleep. And as every time this method is called, it will print these 3 lines. Now, the fundamental thing to know about this is that there's a function declaration, and then there is the function body. The difference between the function declaration or the function body is the indentations. The function body must be indented a certain number of spaces with respect to the function declaration. Now, I know all of this is kind of a bit difficult to grasp, so we'll put this within the concept, within the, how do I say it? Within the context of a problem, right? So now we are going to solve a problem, right? And the problem, sorry. Okay. Yeah. So this is the problem we are going to try to achieve today. We are going to try to solve this problem. Now, suppose you have $100, right? And you can invest this $100 with a 10% return each year. And after 1 year, you would get 110, right? And after 2 years, you will get 100 times 1.1 times 1.1 equals to 121, right? After 3 years, you will get 100 times 1.1 times 1.1 times 1.1, right? So now, I don't know, is this simple interest or I think it's simple interest, or so on and so forth. Now, the point is that we want to take this functionality, this problem statement, and we want to take this and turn it into a functionality such that a user needs to just input his amount, maybe $100. He wants to invest $1,000, $5,000, $6,000, and so on and so forth. And he wants to know how much of that would accrue in 5 years, or in 10 years, or in 6 years, and so on and so forth, right? So let's take this and let's turn it into a method. The fundamental thing we need to know is this, most of this is English. How do we take this functionality and put it into a method or a function. Sorry, whenever I say method, function, they are all the same thing. How do we take this problem statement and turn it into a function such that the user would just say, I want to invest $10,000 for 10 years, and I need you to tell me how much of that would accrue. Does that make sense? Right? Good. So, without much ado, let's begin. So, the first thing we need to do is we'll define a function that will encapsulate that functionality. That function, we'll call it calculate interest, right? Sorry, it's Python. Interest. Now, calculate interest, we expect that when calculating the interest, the user is going to give us the principal amount, if that is the initial amount he is going to invest, right? And then he's going to tell us the number of years that he is going to invest this amount for, right? Good. Right. So basically, what this function says is, hey, user, I can calculate your interest for you. But for me to do that, I need you to tell me how much you want to invest and the number of years you want to invest it for, right? So let's begin solving this problem. So typically, our interest rates is 10%, right? Which is 10% is 10 over 100. Again, this is just maths, right? And now, so which means that at the end of 1 year, the amount of money we expect would be principal amount, right, plus principal amount times interest rates, right? So at the end of 2 years, it will be, sorry, okay. At the end of 2 years, it will be principal amount times interest rates plus principal amount times interest rate, and so on and so forth. So we can shorten this. We can say that as far as this is concerned, we can say that the growth rates, again, this is mathematics. So typically when not every problem begins and ends in a computer, at some point in time, you have to be able to reduce the problem to the bare bones of what it is and then translate it into a computer program. So this is just normal mathematics, elementary school mathematics that I'm trying to develop a function for. So this growth rate will be 1 plus whatever the interest rate is. Again, you can see that this method takes multiple lines, and the differentiating factor is that the body is indented at a certain for a certain number of spaces, right? Now, let's go back to our formula that says that, what is it? So typically, we would say that if we are investing principal amount, would multiply for 1 year, it will be times 1.1. For 2 years, it will be 100 times 1.1 raised to power 2 squared. For 3 years, it will be 1.1 raised to power 3. For 4 years, it will be 1.1 raised to power 4. So what does that mean? Now, okay, to make this simpler, I would just do, say, interest rate is 1.1. Let's try to forget the logic of how we arrived here, right? So what would be my total, right? Again, it can be anything. Total would be principal amount, which the user would supply us, times 1.1 raised to the number of years that were passed in. Again, remember that if the user says, I want to invest for 1 year, it will be 1.1 raised to power 1, which will just be 1.1. If the user said, I want to invest for 2 years, it will be 1.1 squared. If the user said for 3 years, it will be 1.13 raised to power 3. So again, let's take that and exponential. The user is going to tell us his number, the number of years he wants to invest in. And so we'll just do that. So we are saying whatever the user says is the initial amount, take that amount, multiply it by our interest rate or growth rate, which is 1.1, raised to the power of the number of years the user wants to invest in. And then we finally return that, right? So let's use our function. Again, so let's say I want to invest $1,000 for 10 years. What would that be? I would simply say, calculate interest for me. I want you to take $1,000 and show me the results of me investing this for a total of 10 years. Oh, sorry. Okay, so if I invested $1,000 for 10 years, this is what it would amount to, $2,593 and some cents. Now, the same thing if Mr. B came today and said, you know what, I need you to tell me what, if I only have $10 or $16 or $50, let's use 50, and I wanted to invest this for 5 years, what would that be? So again, that would amount to $80 for 5 years. Now, what have we done? We have simply taken all of this English, right, and converted it into a method or a function such that whenever the user wants to calculate his interest or calculate investment or something, sorry, this should be investment. Calculate your investments. So whenever the user wants to calculate investment, he does not need to know about raising 1.1 to his number of years or the interest rate, whether it is 10 years, whatever. He doesn't need to do that. All he needs to know and present to us, the computer program, is I have $1,000. I want to invest it for 10 years. And the computer goes off and does all of that calculation, and then another user can say, hey, I want to know what my money would be in 5 years if I invest $50. Again, he doesn't need to know the details about how the whole calculation is done. All he needs to know is if the amount and the number of years, and the calculation is done for him, and the result is presented to him. Now, does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
Okay, good. I assume everybody's fine. So basically, like I said, everything you would do in Python would typically revolve around you creating functions and your users presenting parameters to those functions, and then you doing whatever logic, the computer running whatever logic you have described in those functions, and the results being returned to the user. That, ladies and gentlemen, is all what Python programming is all about. Creating functions, describing what those functions will be do, and publishing those functions in a way that the user can use it. So someone would ask, yes, okay, so I know all of that. Can you give me an example of applications that have been written in Python? So I don't know how many of us know these websites, Quora.com. This website is built with Python, A to Z. So let's look at these websites. Let's say I want to continue with Google. Now, if I say I want to log in with Google, I'm typically calling a function that would enable me sign in with Google, right? That function contacts Google in the background and determines my credentials and so on and so forth. If that succeeds, I am able to log in to Google. Again, there is a function that makes all of this happen. Now I'm in Quora. Now this is another function that says, whatever, I'll just go back to English. Now I just called a function. So when you visit a Python web application and you are interacting with stuff, for every interaction you do, you are calling a function. If I say, show me awkward situations, I'm calling a function, and there's a function that will run and return results that will be presented in this page for me. So again, like I say, and I'll say it again, everything you would do in Python would revolve around functions and so on and so forth. So, yeah. Do you have a question?
Yeah, there's a question that talks about naming conventions for variables. If you can please explain, and why did you use underscore in the interest rate? Why not write it together? Okay, so just explain naming conventions in programming generally. Thank you.
Okay. So now, why do we have to have conventions? So I would typically just go straight to, let me make an analogy. So for instance, when you read your English language, right, there are basic rules that apply to how English language is written. So the first letter of the first word of every sentence must be capitalized, right? You finish your sentences with full stop and comma. When you ask a question, you typically not end it with a full stop. You will end it with a question mark, and so on and so forth. Now, those are rules, right? And the reason why it is that way, it's so that if Mr. A writes something in English and Mr. B is reading that, he can immediately understand what Mr. A is wrote. That doesn't mean that Mr. A can not decide to say, you know what, I will write without question mark, full stop, and all of that. It is completely up to you to make sense out of the mumbo jumbo I write, right? The same way it is in Python and every programming language, right? So basically, every language has conventions. And the reason why we have those conventions is to make our language easily readable, right? Now, what that means also is that when I write a program, someone else should be able to pick that program, read it, understand it, and continue. Why is that very important? So you should know that these days, it is almost impossible for one person to write any program that is worthy of use. I'll give you an instance, something like your Microsoft Word is about 25 million lines of code. 25 million lines. Yes, someone actually sat down and typed 25 million lines. Now, if someone were to type 25 million lines of code, it would take forever, right? So which means that a group of people had to do that. Now, for the group of people to do that, they needed to be able to understand themselves, which means that they needed to have rules that define how they wrote stuff, so that when Mr. A writes something, Mr. B can immediately look at it and say, oh, I see, this is what you are trying to do, and be able to continue. And Mr. B can write stuff and Mr. A will pick it up tomorrow and say, oh, okay, you added this stuff, well, all well and good, I'll continue from where you stopped. So as far as Python goes, variable names must be lowercase, right? Now, if a variable name, or rather, all identifiers must be lowercase. All identifiers, whether they are functions or whatever, they must be lowercase. If they consist of more than one word, then if they consist of more than one word, then you must separate those words using the underscore character, right? Now, that, ladies and gentlemen, is the most important rule of Python. You should always lowercase everything, and if it requires 2 words, if the function, if for instance, a calculate investment is 2 words, I don't have to put them together. I must separate them by underscore. This does not mean that if you don't follow these rules, your program will not run. The program will run pretty well. But just so that another Python developer can pick up your code and understand it, you should always follow this rule. Everything must be lowercase, and 2 words, if it consists of more than 1 word, then it should be separated by underscore. What this means is that this will now be renamed to say hello. Principal amount will be principal amounts. Number of years will be num of years. And so on and so forth, right? So this is correct Python code from A to Z. Again, I need to change this. Right, good. So that brings us to the end of our lesson for today. Now, for our next class, before our next class, I would need you. Okay, go on.
The comma and colon. When do you use comma? Colon and semicolon. When do you use
Okay.
each?
Okay, so because I write a lot of, I write about 3 or 4 languages, I somehow mix things up. So my apologies. In Python, you don't need to end your sentences with semicolon. It will do just fine. Your statements, you don't need to end them with semicolon. But this column is like a delimiter that says, hey, I am define it. You only ever use it when you are creating functions, right? Or where we'll get to decision structures in our next class. But for now, you just need to know that this column, I would use it when I want to separate my function body from the function declaration. Remember, we said that the function typically consists of the declaration and the body, which says which will do what the function is supposed to do and return the result to the user. So the thing that separates the declaration from the body is the colon. The semicolon, you typically use it to end every statement. You can omit it, you can use it. It's just a personal preference. But you add it, you remove it, it really makes no difference. It doesn't matter. Python will not care. Do you understand? Does that answer your question?
I think so. Yeah. Okay, thank you very much, Peter. You want to give us assignment?
Yeah, so I don't know, we all know about the compound interest, right? Which says, so when we say compound interest, you typically take a number. Oh, sorry, I don't want to write it for you. I just want to describe it. So you would typically take a principal, right? Now, I would send it on an email, but just so that you understand. Principal, so, and you would apply an interest rate, right? Now, at the first year, the principal, the initial amount, which is the principal amount, would have compounded to the principal plus the interest accrued from that 1 year. Now, for the next year, if you wanted to invest for the second year, you would typically start again with the principal and the interest for the previous year. Let's not waste too much time. You can go to Google and Google about compound interest, right? It's pretty popular, people, right? So how do you calculate compound interest? You can look at the details of how it is calculated and all that. Now, what I need us to do by next lesson is to design a function that would take the principal amount and the number of years and compute the principal amount in the number of years that the user wants to invest in. So what we have done here is what is known as simple interest. What I need us to do is to design a function that will take the amount and the number of years and calculate how much that amount would have compounded to in X number of years or whatever.
All right.
Is that understood?
Yes, what we are going to do is that because of our time and this meeting is going to go off anytime soon, we are going to send it out in an email. The next class for Python will take place on Friday in the evening, 6 p.m. Central European Time or 5 p.m. West African Time. Okay, thank you very much, Peter. We so much appreciate your input and your effort in making us understand Python. It's been so great. I really want to commend your efforts. And if you have further questions, you can send us an email. We'll try to attend to it. Tomorrow morning, we'll continue with Introduction to Web by 10 a.m. for people that want to learn HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So if this meeting should end now, there's no need to join again because I'm going to be ending the class now. So, but for further questions, you can send us an email at developerscollegespgs.com, and the videos for this training will